The relentless sun hung low over the vast, unforgiving plains. Dust swirled in lazy spirals around a lone stagecoach, its wheels creaking beneath the weight of years and travel. The sound of hooves faded as the horses slowed, finally coming to a halt in front of a weather-beaten ranch house that stood like a forgotten monument to a better time. Jeremiah Blake sat on the porch, his face etched by sorrow and time, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sky bled into the endless prairie. The wind carried the faint scent of sagebrush and dry earth, but no laughter, no warmth, only the bitter echo of solitude. He was a man carved by loss, the kind of man who wore grief like a second skin. The ranch, once alive with the sounds of family and cattle, had grown quiet. His wife's voice, the soft creak of rocking chairs, children's footsteps, all were ghosts trapped in the sun-bleached walls. Jeremiah's hands, once steady and sure, now trembled slightly as he folded a tattered photograph, a faded image of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Sarah, his wife, taken too soon by the cruel hand of fate. The sun dipped further, casting long shadows that stretched across the cracked porch floor. Jeremiah's gaze shifted to the approaching stagecoach, its passenger a figure wrapped in dust and resolve. The wheels stopped with a final groan, and the door swung open. Anna May stepped down, her boots sinking slightly into the parched soil. She was a woman who carried the grit of the frontier in her stance and the fire of survival in her gaze. Her dark hair was pulled back roughly, strands loose from the journey, and her eyes scanned the ranch with a mixture of wariness and quiet determination. Jeremiah watched her carefully. He had hired her out of necessity. A cook was what the ranch needed. Food was scarce, and without it, even the stubborn earth seemed ready to give up. But there was something in the way Anna May moved, a strength tempered by pain that stirred something deep inside him. "I'm Jeremiah Blake," he said, voice rough like gravel. "This here's the Blake Ranch." Anna May nodded, her voice steady despite the weariness in her bones. "Anna May Carter. I'm here to cook, Mr. Blake. Heard you needed help." He studied her for a moment. There was no false hope in her eyes, no promises of quick fixes, just the hard truth of survival. "You'll start at dawn." She glanced at the house, its peeling paint and sagging porch a testament to years of neglect. "I reckon this place needs more than cooking." Jeremiah's lips tightened. "Ain't wrong, but food comes first." Inside, the kitchen smelled of dry wood and dust. Anna May unpacked her meager belongings with care, a tin of flour, a jar of coffee beans, a small cast-iron skillet worn smooth from use. Jeremiah lingered in the doorway, feeling the unfamiliar weight of company. That night, the wind moaned through the cracked window panes like a restless spirit. Jeremiah sat in the fading light, staring at the empty chair across from him. Anna May moved silently, her hands busy over a fire that sputtered to life, coaxed by her skill. When the stew was ready, she placed a bowl in front of him. The aroma was simple but enough to stir a forgotten hunger. Jeremiah took the first bite, rich, earthy, made from what little they had. It was more than food, it was a lifeline. "Your wife, she cooked like this?" Anna May asked softly, breaking the silence. Jeremiah's eyes darkened with memory. "Sarah was the heart of this place. She kept the house warm, the children fed, and the dreams alive." Anna May looked away, shadows flickering across her face. "I lost my own way once," she said quietly. "Came here to find something steady." Jeremiah nodded, understanding too well the ache behind those words. Two strangers, both carrying heavy burdens, now bound by circumstance and necessity. Days passed, and the rhythm of the ranch slowly returned. Anna May worked from dawn to dusk, filling empty rooms with the scent of fresh bread and simmering stew. Jeremiah watched, sometimes from a distance, reluctant to let his guard down. But there was a subtle shift, a thaw in the cold soil of his heart. Yet beneath the growing warmth lay a stubborn shadow. The land was harsh and unforgiving, but it was the ghosts of the past that threatened to undo them both. Jeremiah's grief was a wall he wasn't sure he could scale, and Anna May's guarded spirit kept her from trusting too easily. For now, all that mattered was the fragile peace they carved out. Two souls leaning on each other in a world that had little room for mercy. As the sun set behind the jagged horizon, Jeremiah lit a lantern and looked toward the dimly lit kitchen, where Anna May hummed a soft tune. Maybe, just maybe, the long road ahead wasn't as lonely as it seemed. Fade out. Morning broke with a pale light filtering through the cracked windows, dust motes dancing in the quiet kitchen where Anna May stood over the stove. The sharp scent of coffee mingled with the soft hiss of sizzling bacon, a sound Jeremiah hadn't heard in months, maybe years. The simple ritual of breakfast stirred something restless in him, a small crack in the wall of grief he'd built around himself. Jeremiah entered quietly, the weight of his solitude visible in the way his shoulders slumped. He hadn't spoken much since she arrived, unsure if words could bridge the vast chasm carved by loss. Anna May glanced up, catching his gaze, but said nothing. Sometimes silence was a safer kind of company. She ladled stew into a rough-hewn bowl, setting it before him with careful hands. Jeremiah picked it up, feeling the warmth seep into his fingers, grounding him in the present. The first bite was hesitant, the flavors familiar yet foreign, like a memory half remembered. "It tastes like home," he said softly, voice rough, as gravel. Anna May smiled faintly, a glimpse of something softer behind her guarded eyes. "That's the best I can do with what we got." He watched her work, the steady rhythm of her movements carving order from chaos. It wasn't just the food she brought to the ranch. It was a quiet strength, a steady pulse against the relentless quiet that had become his life. Days blurred into one another, stitched together by shared meals and stolen conversations. Jeremiah found himself drawn to Anna May's stories, tales of far-flung places and bitter winters survived with nothing but grit and a stubborn heart. Her past was a tapestry of hardship, but also resilience, a mirror to his own battered soul. One evening, as the firelight flickered against rough wooden walls, Jeremiah pulled from his coat pocket a crumpled photograph. The edges were worn, the image faded, a family portrait from better days. He hesitated before offering it to Anna May. "My wife," he said, voice thick with memory. "Sarah. She was the heart of this place." Anna May took the photo with reverence, tracing the outline of the woman's face. "She looks kind." She was. Kept this ranch alive with her spirit. Since she passed, this place's heart nearly stopped beating. Anna May's gaze dropped to the floor. "I lost someone too. Not here, but it left a hole that never healed." They sat in silence, the weight of shared sorrow folding them into a fragile understanding. Neither dared to speak of the loneliness that gnawed at the edges of their fragile peace. Yet even as the bond between them grew, shadows lingered. Jeremiah's grief was a fortress, and though he longed for warmth, he feared the pain of opening old wounds. Anna May, scarred by her own past betrayals, held her trust close, fragile, easily shattered. One afternoon, as the sun climbed high and baked the earth beneath their boots, a visitor rode into town. A stranger with a cold gaze and a leather coat worn like armor. Rumors soon whispered on the wind. A gang of outlaws was tightening its grip on the region, threatening to claim any who dared stand in their way. Jeremiah's jaw clenched at the news. The ranch was more than just land. It was a legacy, a lifeline to the past. Losing it was not an option. Anna Mae noticed the shift in him, the flicker of fire behind his weary eyes. "You're not just fighting the land, are you?" He shook his head slowly. "I'm fighting the ghosts." The nights that followed were thick with tension. Jeremiah patrolled the perimeter, his rifle a constant companion. Anna Mae worked alongside him, the quiet strength she carried becoming a shield against the encroaching threat. One evening, as twilight bled into darkness, Jeremiah finally spoke, voice low and steady. "I hired you for your cooking, Anna Mae. But what I didn't reckon on was needing something more. Someone to remind me what it means to fight for something worth keeping." Anna Mae met his gaze, the hardness in her eyes melting into something tender. "Maybe we both need that, more than just food or shelter." For the first time in months, Jeremiah allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The ranch was more than dirt and timber. It was a chance at redemption, at healing. But outside the fragile walls of the Blake Ranch, danger was gathering, and the coming storm would test them both in ways they never imagined. Fade out. The horizon darkened with the sudden rumble of thunder, a storm brewing over the vast prairie like a beast stirring from slumber. Jeremiah stood outside the barn, muscles taut as he lashed down loose boards, sweat mingling with the first cold. Drops of rain. The wind whipped at his coat, biting through the fabric like the memories he couldn't shake. Inside, Anna Mae moved quickly, lighting lanterns and securing the kitchen windows. Her fingers trembled slightly, not from fear, but the fierce determination that had anchored her since she'd arrived. They both knew the storm outside was more than weather. It was the coming of a different kind of tempest. Rumors in town had grown louder, the whispers now screams. A gang of outlaws had set their sights on the Blake Ranch. Hungry for easy plunder and control over the land, they viewed Jeremiah as nothing more than an obstacle, a relic clinging to a dying dream. The first rider appeared on the ridge just as dusk swallowed the light, a silhouette against the bruised sky. Jeremiah's heart pounded in his chest, but his hands were steady on the rifle he gripped like a lifeline. "Looks like trouble's found us," Anna Mae said, her voice low and steady as she joined him on the porch, a rifle slung over her shoulder. Jeremiah nodded. "They want what I got. They think this place is easy pickings." "They're wrong," she said, eyes blazing with resolve. "We'll show them." The riders rode closer, dust trailing like smoke behind their horses. Jeremiah counted 7, armed and grim-faced, their eyes cold with menace. Their leader, a man with a jagged scar slicing down one cheek, spurred his horse forward, dismounting with the ease of a man used to command. "Blake," the outlaw sneered, voice rough as gravel. "This land belongs to us now. Hand it over, and maybe we let you walk away." Jeremiah's jaw clenched, the old fire flickering in his gaze. "This land's been in my family longer than you've drawn breath. You'll have to kill me first." The outlaw laughed, dark and cruel. "That's what we're here for." Gunshots cracked the night air. Anna Mae fired from the porch, her aim true and fierce. Jeremiah returned fire, his years of experience surfacing beneath the rage and fear. The ranch exploded into chaos, horses rearing, shouts echoing, the thunderstorm above mirroring the storm below. Anna Mae moved like a force of nature, her rifle steady despite the adrenaline racing through her veins. For the first time, Jeremiah saw her not just as a cook, but as a fierce ally, a woman whose courage could match his own. They fought side by side, two broken souls bound by necessity, defending not just land, but a fragile hope. Amid the gunfire, Jeremiah caught a glimpse of the outlaw leader aiming directly at Anna May. Without thinking, he threw himself in front of her, taking the bullet meant for her shoulder. Pain seared through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to fall. Anna May's eyes flashed with fury as she steadied her aim and fired again. The leader staggered, a cry escaping his lips as he collapsed to the ground. The remaining outlaws, seeing their leader fall, scattered like frightened crows, disappearing into the night's storm. Jeremiah leaned heavily against the porch railing, blood staining his shirt, breath ragged but spirit unbroken. Anna May rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she pressed a cloth to his wound. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, eyes searching his. "I couldn't let you get hurt," he said, voice rough but honest. "Not now, not when we're finally fighting for something real." The rain began to ease, the thunder rolling away like a departing threat. In the stillness, the two stood together, bloodied but unbroken, bound by something deeper than survival. Anna May met his gaze, her voice soft but certain. "We're more than just a cook and a widower now, Jeremiah. We're a team, and we're not giving up." Jeremiah managed a weak smile, the warmth of hope flickering amidst the pain. "No, not this time." As dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, the ranch stood battered but standing. The ghosts of the past still lingered, but a new chapter had begun, written in sweat, blood, and the promise of something stronger. The storm had tested them, and they had endured. Fade out. The morning sun filtered gently through the thin curtains, casting a soft glow over the worn wooden floorboards of the Blake Ranch kitchen. The storm had passed, leaving the land washed clean and the air crisp with the scent of sage and rain-soaked earth. Inside, the quiet was different, heavier but not empty. It held the promise of new beginnings. Jeremiah sat in the worn rocking chair by the hearth, his injured shoulder wrapped carefully in linen, the bottom sting of pain a constant reminder of last night's battle. Anna May moved around the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared breakfast. Eggs, fresh bread, and coffee brewed strong enough to wake the dead. Their eyes met across the table, and for the first time in a long while, Jeremiah saw more than a hired hand in Anna May's steady gaze. He saw a partner, someone who had come not only to cook, but to fight for the fragile hope buried deep beneath years of loss. "Your shoulder's looking better," Anna May said, setting a plate in front of him. "But you're still stubborn." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that held both pain and gratitude. "It's the only way I know how to live." Anna May sat down beside him, her voice quieter now. "You don't have to live like that anymore. Not with me here." Jeremiah's gaze dropped to the table, the weight of his grief suddenly less suffocating. "I thought I was alone, that my heart was closed for good." She reached out, her hand steady and warm. "Sometimes the hardest things to find are right in front of us. Maybe all we needed was a second chance." Outside, the ranch was waking, the soft sounds of cattle lowing and birds calling mingling with the distant hum of life returning to the land. The scars of the night's violence were visible, broken fence posts, churned earth, spent shells, but they were wounds that would heal. Jeremiah rose, steadying himself with a grunt. "We've got work to do. This land isn't going to tend to itself." Anna May stood too, her eyes shining with quiet resolve. "Then let's make sure it's worth fighting for." Together, they stepped outside, the sun warming their backs as they surveyed the ranch. For the first time since Sarah's passing, Jeremiah felt something new, a flicker of hope, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, the future wasn't as bleak as he feared. Anna Mae reached into her satchel and pulled out a small bundle of seeds. "I brought these with me," she said, holding them out. "We'll plant them come spring, something to remind us that life goes on." Jeremiah took the seeds, turning them over in his calloused hands. Life goes on, and so do we. They worked side by side through the day, repairing fences, feeding cattle, and planning for the months ahead. Each task was a stitch in the fabric of healing, patching wounds both old and new. As the sun dipped low once more, they returned to the porch, weary but unbroken. Jeremiah lit a lantern, and Anna Mae settled beside him, their shoulders touching in quiet solidarity. "I never thought I'd find someone like you again," Jeremiah admitted, voice rough but sincere. Anna Mae smiled, a softness in her eyes that mirrored his own. "Maybe you were just waiting for the right one?" The porch creaked under their weight as the stars began to prick the darkening sky. Somewhere beyond the hills, coyotes called, and the prairie whispered its ancient song. Jeremiah breathed deeply, the night air filling his lungs with a newfound peace. "I hired you to cook," he said softly, "but what I truly needed was my heart back." Anna Mae squeezed his hand gently. "And I'm not going anywhere." Together, they watched the flickering lantern light dance against the night, a beacon of resilience, love, and the promise of a tomorrow worth fighting for. Fade out.